Oh, we're live. Are we live?
We're live, and it's 1:50, so we can wait until people start entering.
Yeah, I'm not being Irish today. Irish time is normally
20 minutes after.
Yeah, exactly. And I always found that unusual when people here in America would apologize for being late when they were 3 minutes past the hour. I was like, what do you mean you're late? You know, this is...
My wife used to tease me all the time because if I'd be picking up the kids, I'm like, I'll be there in 20 minutes. And she's like, it's going to be an hour. But I was like, it's an Irish thing, 20 minutes.
It's a generic 20 minutes. Yeah,
exactly. Of course it is. So I think we're live on LinkedIn. I hope we are anyway. I don't know if Colleen, you can see if I can pull up LinkedIn briefly on my phone just to make sure. But I think we should go, and hopefully people will be joining us today. It's noon here in Chicago, on a kind of an overcast day, although we've had quite a taste of spring this week, so I feel like we're being spoiled. And I'm so happy to be here with Matt and Colleen. I think we might give it a minute or two just to let people kind of settle in. But how's your week been, both of you guys? You guys had a good week?
Busy, but good, of course. Yeah, we've had a lot of content this week. We pushed out a few catalysts, and we did a podcast, and we've been working on some state policy. So it's been a busy one, but a good one, I think. What about you, Colleen?
Yeah, I think weeks that are busy now and productive are like, great statements to make at the end of a week, right? I'd rather be busy than stagnant and not moving forward. And I think a lot of the work that, you're doing in the Institute, I sat in on one of our Institute's, our STEM challenges. I sat in with updates from the students, and it's amazing how much the students are getting done in a pandemic and with their mentors, and it's all done virtually. And I kind of cheered up, but I think that's a good thing.
That's amazing. And when you say students, what age are they?
High school
students.
Yep, the STEM challenge is matching a high school with a corporate partner in working on a real world challenge. So today was with Horizon, and it was great.
That's amazing.
It was like 5 different groups presented, and students create so much magic. And if we think we're innovative, wait till you hear what some of the students come up with.
That's incredible. And I mean, talk about real world challenges. I mean, I can't imagine being I thought high school was tough. Anyway, just being a teenager and dealing with all that, but let alone having to deal with like homeschooling and a pandemic. Oh, we have some comments here. Hi, Cassidy. Thanks for joining us. If people want to pop in the comments where you're watching from, we're new to LinkedIn Live. And so we were chatting about hoping that the technology was going to work okay. So it seems like it's working because we have Cassidy saying hi to us. So we're so excited. Anyway, I am just beyond excited to host this event, to have Matt and Colleen here today. The main reason that we wanted to set this up was the three of us co-wrote an opinion piece that was published in Crain's. When was it published? Was it last week? It seemed the weeks are all kind of meshing into one. But we published it last week, and we'd been writing it for a while. But the title of the piece was Immigrant Entrepreneurs and How They Can Fuel Chicago's COVID Recovery. And really the essence of it was to kind of look at the system that we have now, the immigration system, and to see, just to highlight what we see on a kind of regular basis as being a big gap in the system. And that is the system as it relates from to immigrant entrepreneurs, to kind of particularly like the startup kind of scene. I see we're getting some more comments. People are saying thanks for hosting this. Jeremy tuning in from Galway. Great to see you here. Anthony from, Galway's a great spot.
I've spent many a day in Galway.
Yeah, Colleen, you have some Irish roots, right?
I do. My parents, my ex-husband, I'm an Irish citizen as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and I mean, I don't know, Matt, if you've ever been to Ireland or not, but if not, have you been?
I have, yeah. Well, my wife is Irish too, so well, Irish American, I should say. She's a couple generations removed, but her entire family's Irish. So lots of Irish roots on the
Yep.
stream here.
Yeah,
My sister moved back probably 19 years ago. She's in Wexford.
wonderful. Yeah, I mean, I actually, speaking of Ireland, I want to give a shout out to my dad. I don't think my mom and dad are watching, but my dad is 70 today. So happy birthday, Dad.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Yeah. It's a bit emotional for me, to be honest, to be apart from him for such a big birthday. I'm turning 40 later this year, and so we always have our milestone birthdays in the same year, and I always kind of anticipated. I just thought we'd be celebrating together, but we are from afar, thanks to the virtues of technology, but just wanted to wish him a happy birthday. So thanks for allowing me to pop that in. Oh, happy birthday to my dad. Speaking of technology, he's not a tech person at all. So he's probably at home on his flip phone trying to figure this out. So I'll pass on those regards. So I'll just share a bit of a history about why we decided to get together to write this piece. It was something that we've all kind of been working on, I think, in different capacities for many years. I'd say at least 10 years. This has been kind of a pressing issue in immigration and in the startup community. And I had been featured in a Sun-Times article in relation to this, and Colleen and myself started chatting, and then Matt as well, about what more we could do to shine a bit of a light on this. And so the end result was our opinion piece in Crain's, and that really, we're hoping, is the first of many things that we're going to do on this, and this is kind of the springboard to this conversation. So I don't know if Matt, Colleen, one of you guys wants to just talk about the Illinois Science and Technology Coalition, the work that you guys do, your connection maybe to the startup visa or to immigrant entrepreneurs, if you want to just fill us in a little bit on that.
Go ahead, Matt.
Sure. So I can talk a little bit about background of the coalition and who we are and why this work is so important to us, right? And you're right, Fiona, that we've been working on it for a long time. So we're the Illinois Science and Technology Coalition. We've been around in the state of Illinois for more than 30 years now, and really exist to try to grow the state's economy through support for science, technology, innovation, entrepreneurship, all of the things that help us grow jobs in the state. So we do that in a number of ways, one of which is data. So we publish what's called the Illinois Innovation Index every year, which tracks things like STEM talent at our universities, research and development and kind of innovation activity at our universities and companies and federal labs, and then entrepreneurship, kind of principally centered around what's going on at our universities in the state, which are such drivers of new innovation and startup creation and kind of all of those good things. And really, we became, I think, interested in this work and passionate about it because of working with those university entrepreneurship centers and realizing how many of their founders and entrepreneurs were foreign-born, either students or faculty, right? Sort of regardless of immigration status. So, it became, I think, a passion for us because the other part of our work is policy advocacy. So both at the state level and then the federal level, we work to try to support this community of innovation by, advocating for strong policy that supports, new business creation and job growth. And what we really saw is that, we as a state were missing out on a huge opportunity for new business creation because it was such a pain for these entrepreneurs that were, foreign born, often international students or, visiting students, whatever the case might be, because they were having to spend so much time worrying about their immigration status that they were having difficulty, pursuing their startup. Mm-hmm. And in many cases, these were, really high tech, really innovative startups that are, getting funding and, really growing quickly. But that immigration piece was such a hurdle for them. And we kind of looked around and said, gee, this is seems like such an obvious thing, right? Why are we making it so hard for these entrepreneurs to stay in the country when they're building a company that's going to employ, tens, if not hundreds of people in the state? So I think that's really, from a coalition standpoint, how we got involved in this.
Yeah.
And then for the past 5 years, being here at the coalition, it's been kind of a personal, mission of mine to try to spread the word on this as much as we can,
Yeah.
and work with groups like you, Fiona, and IVCA and the National Venture Capital Association as well, and Forward.us, and kind of all these groups that are working on this. And I certainly hope we're building some momentum. It seems like we are.
Yeah, I hope so. And Matt and I first met actually at, speaking of like policy and dedicating your career to something, Matt and I met at an event that was hosted by Forward.us with Senator Durbin. And so I'll just give you a brief background. Forward.us, it was actually set up by Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates to essentially lobby for something like the startup visa. That was the kind of origins of that group. And so it was set up to do just that. And since then, I mean, it kind of like added on bits of advocacy and does a lot of work with DACA and with Dreamers, and it does stuff with criminal justice reform, and they're just great advocates. And so Matt and I met at an event that was being hosted by them with Senator Durbin. It was a pretty intimate round table where we got to, share the experiences that we have had of working with Dreamers. There were some Dreamers there as well. And I know Senator Durbin has dedicated his career, at least for the past 20 years, to getting some type of immigration reform for DACA and for the Dreamers. And there's the Dream and Promise Act is super important. But I think the way I think immigration reform is going to go is that it might end up being more individual bills. And so we think that we're not looking for something to the exclusion of any other immigrant groups, but we think that there's also space to have conversations around startup visas and innovation. Colleen, when did you join the coalition? Do you want to give a bit about your background in relation to immigration and tech and kind of innovation?
Sure, I've been lifelong Chicagoan. Have moved away, but have always moved back. And I became the president and CEO of the Illinois Science and Technology Coalition in July. So in the midst of the pandemic. So it's been an exciting ride. I am so honored to be here with you and Matt. Matt as the director is just an exceptional human being to work with as yourself. And so this topic is really important to me because as a serial entrepreneur, I've been a founder, co-founder of several companies, most of those acquired. But through all of those years, have hired and worked with immigrant, employees and entrepreneurs. During the 4 years of the Trump administration, I was working with a consulting company, and I went home on a daily basis and cried because of the people who had to leave or, so this is really important to me. I'm the daughter of an immigrant. And like I said, a serial entrepreneur. I'm one of the founders of the Women's Entrepreneurship Institute at DePaul. And we all know that, entrepreneurs drive our economy, even the smallest of companies. So I'm just excited to be here today to talk about this. Yeah,
great. And I think, you don't have to have a background in immigration to appreciate why this is like an important issue, and I think I'm seeing some comments here. People someone's tuning in. John is watching from Philadelphia, originally from Donegal. Mark, hi Mark, good to see you. Graham Hughes says he managed a startup office from Ireland and talking about why this visa makes sense. And so I'm just going to share kind of a little bit about what I see in terms of like the legal options for immigrant entrepreneurs and kind of why this is an issue. I think honestly, people are really surprised when they hear that there's no option for startups. And people are like, in the run up to this event, people were saying, I can't believe that this isn't already an option, and it seems very surprising. But when you look at kind of Congress and their Congress's actions on immigration over the past 10 years plus, maybe we haven't really seen anything anyway. So it's not really that surprising that nothing has been done, right? And so with Forward.us kind of starting to like lobby, there's a huge gap in the immigration system for startup entrepreneurs. There are some existing options, but they're very much based on you having an employer that really is not you, right? It's and if you own some of the entity that's sponsoring you, then that can create some difficulties with, let's say, the H-1B, which is the professional visa. It's not to say that you can't do it. It's just that it's difficult. You have to kind of go again. You know, the H-1B is like an employer-sponsored visa. You need to show that you're an employee. It's not a great job for a CEO because it's not like a specific specialty occupation. You know, there's other options that require personal investment into the company, like the E2. And that's only for people from certain countries. That's based on the country having a treaty with the US. So basically, you know, I see these options as an attorney every day, and I can tell you exactly why they don't work. And so sometimes the O1 extraordinary ability visa works for immigrant entrepreneurs, but they might not be at that point yet. They don't get the opportunity to work on their company to get them to that extraordinary level. And so the idea is we need something before the O1 that will enable them to do this, right? And so you know, this was recognized as being kind of a deficiency in the current system. And what happened was the Obama-Biden administration created an executive action for this. And so what they did was they created an executive action, and it was like in the way that DACA was done through executive order versus through Congress passing a law. And you can kind of see the vulnerabilities of executive actions because they can be stopped by a new administration. And that's exactly what happened here. The Obama-Biden administration, as they were kind of finishing up their term, they created this International Entrepreneur Rule, IER. And we were all very excited for the implementation of that. And then the Trump administration came in and pretty much blocked it straight away. And so I don't know, Matt, if you want to talk about kind of our piece and how, you know, in addition to maybe us saying, like, obviously the IER could be used maybe potentially temporarily, but like we think something more needs to be done. Do you want to kind of share some thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember being on a call when the IER kind of rules came out, and there was kind of a comment period, right? And groups like ours and you know, those around the country were, you know, trying to figure out what the best way to do this was. And you know, what the Obama administration created was something that was, you know, trying to fill this gap, but was pretty specific, right? You had to hit a certain amount of fundraising from kind of qualified investors, and you had to, there may have even been an employee kind of requirement, and you know, it was a pretty specific visa option for startup founders, and it was, you know, I think it was roundly supported by just about everybody in the community, right? This wasn't a controversial piece of legislation or executive action, as you said, Fiona. But what happened, right, was the Trump administration came in and essentially shelved it. And their argument, which I think a lot of us have kind of laughed about, was that nobody was interested in this visa, which, you know, anyone who works in the space knows that that's very much not true. So, you know, luckily with the Biden administration coming in, you know, there's momentum, I think, to finally implement that executive action. Mm-hmm. But the point that we make in our op-ed piece was essentially that, you know, much like DACA, right, which is an executive action, you know, those are fairly fragile, right? And a future administration could come in and say, you know, hey, we don't want to offer this option to entrepreneurs anymore. So our proposal is, you know, let's get this in statute. Let's put this in law. So, you know, it's solid and that we can count on it for, you know, years, decades to come. Because, you know, so much of this is, you know, obviously there's so many reasons to do this, right? There's kind of the, you know, social and humanitarian angle that, you know, why are we kicking folks out of the country when they're here trying to support our economy? Mm-hmm. You know, there's the economic angle that, hey, there's, you know, our country has nothing to lose, right? Why not let these folks try to start a company and you know, grow and hire people? That's just straight up creating jobs, right? Why would we not want to do that? So, you know, I think there's a million reasons to do this, but having something in law really, you know, allows us to be more competitive, I think, on a global, you know, stage, right? There are, I think, over 40 countries who are, you know, as we look at kind of the marketplace for global talent, there are 40 plus countries that have something like this that we're competing with. right? And we hear stories all the time about, somebody goes to school in the U.S. Because, we have world-class universities, obviously in Illinois and elsewhere, that are attracting these students from around the world, right? And oftentimes, if you're the kind of student who's willing to move halfway around the world for your education, you're probably pretty entrepreneurial, right? It just kind of comes with the territory. So, a lot of them end up starting companies. And under the current system, what we see too often is, they start a company and they say, hey, this is, this immigration system, this is screwy. Why am I doing this? Let me move to Toronto, where they're very friendly to immigrant entrepreneurs. They're going to give me a visa. They're going to, set me up with, an ecosystem that's supporting the work that I'm trying to do. So, without this in law, we're kind of losing that long-term strategic planning that says, hey, if you're entrepreneurial and you want to start a company in the US, here's this option for you, come do it. So obviously, I think the IER is a good, piece of policy. It's just, it's not as permanent as, what we would like to see if we were able to pass it through law.
Yeah, and I think a couple of things. Mark is commenting there, saying the UK has launched a startup visa category in 2019, and it's incredibly easy to obtain. And so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. Other countries are doing this well, and we can look to them. I think I was kind of laughing when you were saying that one of the reasons that the Trump administration justified terminating or trying to terminate IER was the lack of demand, and which I am laughing about because we had people lining up to file for the IER. I do mentoring through 1871, and we literally had people that were like, how do I, we were getting ready to go. Straight out the gate, the Trump administration said they were rescinding it, like immediately. So we were saying to people, well, why would we have you apply for an option that they're saying they're terminating ASAP? So they use the low rates of application as some type of justification, or I guess to say that there was no demand. And we were like, that's insane. And then they also quoted some other options that we know just do not work for immigrant entrepreneurs, like the E2 or the EB5, which is for people who are investing like tons of their own money into getting an investor green card. So, yeah, I just thought that was kind of ridiculous. And any of us who work in this industry, that's crazy. But Colleen, do you want to share a bit about, you mentioned doing stuff with DePaul and universities. Like, do you want to kind of share about how this is like relevant maybe to the universities here in Illinois?
Yeah, and I think that really adds into your discussion on demand, right? So Matt, gets data from across the state because we represent the state, right? And as he mentioned, look at the top universities or even smaller universities. I mean, we're in a university-rich state, and 40%. This was like a shocking statistic for me. I mean, it's 40% of the startups that start out of our universities are immigrant run or founded, which I think is shocking. So when we talk about, I mean, not shocking in a bad way, it's a great way, right? So when we talk about the demand for something like IER or a startup visa, I mean, when you've got 40% of companies out of universities being started by an immigrant founder, I mean, that's enough to, push this forward, right?
Yeah. 40% of that. I mean, that's an incredible, that's like almost just a little bit less than half, so.
Exactly. And I mean, that doesn't include, the immigrant entrepreneurs not at our state universities. Yeah. Who knows what that number is? I mean, that would probably be something good for us to look at, Matt, as we're driving for this. But if it's 40% out of universities, just imagine how many it is not associated with our state's universities.
And people from abroad that have these great ideas that could come in with them as well. That was the whole idea of the IER, that it could be used for people here, but you could also come in on it too. And it's like, I mean, yeah. So I think, but even we obviously don't have data to support that, because this is like the possibility of like, who knows, but we know, looking at just that 40% number, that's crazy high and we should be supporting those.
Well, innovation drives our economy, right? Any successful economy. Why would we not be embracing that, innovation and embracing that success for ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I thought that Matt had written, you know, as we were writing together, one of the lines that kind of stood out to me was that by not having a program like this, we're essentially turning would-be job creators into employees. And so that's what's happening. So people are in universities with these great ideas, and many of my clients have were in the spot where they, you know, and like, so Matt, I think you said about people coming here, you know, they're probably pretty like determined and kind of you know, just innovative anyway. And I think I've heard someone describe immigration as the great entrepreneurial journey. And I just thought that was a beautiful way to describe it, because it takes a lot. I mean, I know, because I came here at 20 and I didn't know anybody, and I came here from law school, and you know, it does take courage, and it takes ambition. And so you're not going to, you know, sit back. Most foreign students who come here are really, really committed to working, and then they don't get that opportunity. And so, Colleen, what kind of, you said you have done some work with DePaul University, was it? Do you want to share a bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, we're really excited. We started the Women's Entrepreneurship 3 years ago. 40 of us got together, and we're the original founding members, and we financially pay for it. And we open it up to 4 cohorts a year. And I'm really excited. Our big focus, of course, is women. But we partnered with the YWCA this year to form another one just for women of color. So we're really excited about that. I would love to see at some point that we can open it up, you know, to immigrant founders as well. The immigrant founders that we've had within our cohorts, I think there haven't been a lot. We only accept like 10 to 12 each cohort, but there's always a few in each of those cohorts. And so, you know, what happens? I mean, we had one woman who was developing talk about entrepreneurial. I think she was an electrical engineer back in the Ukraine, and came and learned as much as she could, and was doing, you know, the electrical engineering on this product, and studying and doing the marketing, and, you know, learned how to sew to create this, right? And it was such a great product, and it's in the children's space. So of course, you know, when I look at that, that's a huge market. Yeah. What's going to happen, you know, when she can't stay here? Who's going to take over that amazing company? Why should she have to lose all the success that she's gained?
Yeah, like it doesn't make sense. I think not only would having an option like this help students that are here already, but it would be a big incentive for students to come here from abroad, to knowing that this would be an option. And I mean, I think the whole notion of the American dream is this idea that you can create your own opportunity, that there is space for you to do that. And I mean, right now with the system that we have, that's just not the case. You know, we don't allow people that opportunity to see what their idea can become. And the way the IER was set up was that it was really reserved for high potential startup companies that would potentially create jobs. They didn't necessarily have to at the time, but it would be that they would have that potential, which is like, that's a win-win-win. You know, it doesn't make sense that instead we're making those, you know, would-be entrepreneurs go work for another company because they don't have another visa option. And this is something that we really do. I see it all the time. And then there's such an lost opportunity cost, because we don't know how many people would take advantage of this if this was even the opportunity. If, you know, because they're working for other companies, and H-1Bs afraid to even think about a startup because they know they wouldn't have any other option. And so where do you guys think, I mean, we're going to go from here, right? I think there is some appetite to just look at immigration in a different way, which has been, to be honest, so refreshing as working under the Trump administration for the past 4 years have been pretty soul destroying for us and for our clients. And I think as we're coming out of hopefully the worst of the pandemic, and even looking at the pandemic, there are so many immigrants surrounding the creation of the vaccine as well. When you look at the different companies, you know, the BioNTech, the founders of that were Turkish immigrants into Germany, you know, and some of the CEOs from some of the major pharmaceutical companies here are also immigrants. And so, you know, we kind of want to have, you know, that type of innovation here, and we need to encourage it. But as we kind of move beyond with a new appetite for immigration, with hopefully the worst of the pandemic behind us, what do you guys think we can do from here? And for people who are watching and kind of looking on, is there anything that people can do to get involved in this?
I think there absolutely is. I think, one of the things we were talking about, I think before we started the stream was, putting out our op-ed and kind of getting, comments from folks that we work with or kind of in this realm that they didn't realize that this was an issue, right? So I think, keeping up the pressure in terms of telling the stories of immigrant entrepreneurs, and unfortunately, a lot of the stories that we have, or I should say fortunately, are of entrepreneurs that have navigated this system and been successful. But there's also, many stories, unfortunately, of, folks that have started a company and that have either had to, leave the company because they were an immigrant and they couldn't get a visa while they were running their company. Or, as you mentioned about that line of turning job creators into employees, we see founders all the time that say, look, I really want to pursue this, but I want to stay in the country. So let me go work for, one of the big tech companies so I can get an H-1B. Or folks that just move their company out of the country.
Yeah.
And we mentioned that earlier. So I think telling those stories is important. But the other thing I wanted to mention too is, we've done some talking about the Trump administration, and, it was obviously a really challenging period for immigration. It was such a kind of hardline anti-immigration administration. But the startup visa for decades has had bipartisan support.
Yeah.
Right. This really isn't a partisan issue because it just makes so much sense. This was part of the Startup Act that Senator Moran, a Republican senator from Kansas, has introduced several times.
Yeah.
Right. It's a bill to try to boost our ability to create new entrepreneurial startups. And part of that bill included, creating this pathway for immigrant entrepreneurs. Right. Because it makes so much sense, right? Why are we turning these folks from founders into employees when, we can be helping them create jobs, and even if you're kind of the mindset that this is a zero-sum game and, immigrants are taking jobs, which is certainly not something that I subscribe to. I don't think that's true. And I think the data, shows that not to be true. But even if that's your mindset, right? Why would you want policy that takes somebody who's creating a new company and hiring American workers? Why would you want them to leave that and go take a job with a company elsewhere? It just, it doesn't make any sense. So I think it's important to point out that this is bipartisan, right? And I think, we've seen with the, Biden administration and their immigration proposals, obviously, DACA and a path to citizenship is huge. And, that's I think a great positive for our economy. But unfortunately, we haven't seen this issue kind of specifically addressed in the proposals that are out there. And it seems like, unfortunately, a big comprehensive immigration bill is probably not super likely. So I do think there's an opportunity for, somebody, hopefully maybe even from the Illinois delegation, to, create this bill that would take this, that would help address this need, right? Because it's there, we can point to it in data. I think there's bipartisan support. So, as we're looking at the whole suite of immigration reform, and I think all of it is very important. And as you said, Fiona, we don't want this to take away from the other parts of immigration reform, which are also very important. But this does seem like, kind of a low lift, right? Why don't we do this so we can start making progress on these issues?
Yeah, absolutely. Colleen, do you have anything to add to that?
I was just going to add that, Matt's right, both of you, that immigration reform is needed in this country in general. But I also wanted to say that, since we work in STEM, we really focus on science and technology, but, our immigrant entrepreneurs are from a slew of different industries, right? So there's the, in my family alone, it was the immigrant, people that, formed construction companies and hired scores of people. And then through their, scores of vendors that worked for them in their communities and built those communities. So, we have to look beyond on how good immigrant entrepreneurs are for the country in general, not just in science and technology. But for this discussion today, I mean, Matt and I think, work a lot, like I said, with the universities. And so we focus there. But this is a much broader discussion than just that.
Yeah, I agree. And if you buy into the narrative, as Matt was saying, that it is a zero-sum game, meaning for immigrant is taking a job that a US citizen would normally occupy, which is not true, but imagine that's what you think. Well, why wouldn't we let them the opportunity to create their own jobs and let that job go to the US citizen that would ordinarily occupy it, right, in the H-1B? And so, they don't even have that opportunity to do that. And you're right, Colleen, it's industry specific. But what I always found kind of interesting, and this is what I see when I work with my clients, is that the National Venture Capital Association, which Matt mentioned earlier, so that's the association, they actually sued the Trump administration over their attempted rescission of the international entrepreneur rule. So they brought a lawsuit that was pretty successful, saying that they didn't terminate the program or rescind the program in the way they should have. Kind of like the arguments that we saw in the DACA case, right? You didn't follow the procedure to get rid of a new, kind of action. So that was the arguments that we had seen there as well. But, what I think is interesting when I see that these national people in the venture capital industry who are pretty savvy investors, right? They put their money on, they don't just throw money up. They make it savvy investments, and they're smart and informed investments. And I've always thought, if these seasoned investors think that this entrepreneur and this idea is a good investment, why would we also not give them that opportunity to see what it can turn into? And the IER was positioned so it would give people 2 years to grow the company. And then after 2 years, we can reassess and see whether they would warrant an extension or, other types of options in the future. And it was just such a no-brainer. And you're right, there's no reason why this should be a controversial bipartisan issue. And the only reason it would ever be, I think, is just because the whole notion of immigration has become so polarized over the past few years. It makes business sense. It makes, it makes economic sense. It's just a good idea all around. And I think when you're looking at the contributions, even foreign students, by being here alone, they create, I think, almost 500,000 jobs a year, and they put so much money into the economy just by living here. And I wrote an opinion piece in USA Today that was published last summer all about this, about how much they're such a huge asset to the US, right? It's one of our, I think it was called by the New York Times, it was an educational export, but it's actually in the US, right? And it's such of huge value to the US. I see Graham Hughes has commented there saying that 20 startup visa programs are in Europe across 16 countries. And so we see what other countries are doing, like the UK, Canada. There are other countries that do this really well. And to me, I think, any thoughts on kind of with the pandemic, how much the country has suffered from an economic point of view, why it might make sense for us to really push and revisit this now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I've said this a million times, but the strength of our universities, in this state, which is, where we focus on at ISTC, but across the country, we attract the best and brightest students from around the world, right? And we say to them, come and study in the US, but too often our immigration system says, come and study at our world-class universities, but then you have to go home, right? Yeah. Which it doesn't make any sense for our economy, right? It's, let's attract the best and brightest, and let's do everything we can to keep them here, right? Because what we're seeing too often, especially under the Trump administration, and it was, made worse by COVID, is, we have an immigration system that basically says, you can come to the US to study, but you have to tell us that you're going to go home afterwards, right? You can't stay here, right? And there are a few options that do allow students to stay. There's OPT, which gives you, I think it's a 12-month extension after you graduate to kind of look for employment. I think it's it's a training, essentially, is kind of the justification for that. And you can get an extension if you're a STEM student, kind of seeking STEM employment. But what, we see as kind of the natural, pathway that students take is they come to the US, they study, they get their degree. And if they're entrepreneurs, they're building their company while they're still in school. Mm-hmm. And then they go on OPT, right? So they can stay, for that 12 months or the STEM extension, so they can stay for 2 years, and they continue building that company. But then what's for them after that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's really where the gap is we don't have a visa that says, hey, you've come to study at our university, you've created this promising company, but you're not at the position where you can get an O1 extraordinary ability, a visa, right? Which are difficult to get. So those are the ones that we're losing, right? Because they're saying, okay, there's no pathway for me here. I've got to go get a job, or I've got to go back home, or I've got to, take my company elsewhere. So, as you look at kind of the pathway that we see of students coming to our universities, starting companies, but then, that's really the gap where they're falling off. So, as we look at, what we need to fill that gap, that's really where I think the startup visa sits. And to your point, Fiona, I mean, the IER was not, a visa that said, hey, if you just incorporate a business, we'll give you a visa, right?
Yeah.
There were very specific terms.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, right, you had to be venture backed.
Yeah.
You had to have an American, investment firm say, hey, you're worth putting our money behind, right?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, why the heck are we saying, we've got American firms investing in your company, but you've got to leave? It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I think that's why the National Venture Capital Association were so just like motivated to pursue the litigation against the Trump administration, and their members are not all Democrats, right? I mean, they are like from all sorts, right? And so it was like the money that was being invested that now was, when people put their money in a company, and I know this from working with my clients, they want to know, one of the first questions that the investor will ask is like, who are the founders? What's their immigration status? Are they going to be here to run the company? That's a question that they always get asked. And I mean, speaking of like college, there's a couple of things and kind of starting things in college. Like one of my clients, Swipe Sense, and Mert Aziri allowed us to, he gave us a quote for our opinion piece that we had written for Crain's. And he, so his company Swipe Sense, he started that when he was in college at Northwestern University. It actually started as a project through that Northwestern Hospital came into the university and said, we have this issue. The issue was hospital-acquired infections. How relevant is that now that we're thinking about COVID and about like sanitization and all that type of stuff? So they said, this is our issue. We don't know how to fix it. And so Merton, his roommate or his college mate and now business partner, longtime business partner, now set up, they had all these ideas, and the end result was Swipe Sense, which is this healthcare technology company that tracks the spread of hospital-acquired infections, tried to limit, it's basically hand hygiene software and tracking, and they've done loads of other stuff, asset tracking. With COVID, they started contact tracing. They did this whole thing. I mean, incredible. That company, Mert was here and he got the STEM OPT, and then we worked together, got him the O1 visa, but he had like extra time because of the STEM extension and was able to get to the O1 stage. But not everybody is able to get to that stage. There was a story, this UK entrepreneur Nikki Gulmus, I think, I don't know if I'm pronouncing her name correctly, but she set up Nova Credit Inc. when she was at Stanford with a roommate, and it was about to solve the problem that immigrants, when you come here, you've no credit history because you've never been here before, so you can't get a phone, you can't get anything. And so that was kind of her issue, was trying to leverage the foreign credit history for immigrants. And their company has employed so many people, and she speaks openly about the issues that she had with getting access to visas. I see a comment Karen is saying here that she practices Canadian immigration law, and she's really surprised how the US is so far behind in terms of promoting and supporting entrepreneurial streams. She's saying that the entrepreneur will be the backbone of the economic recovery in many countries. Colleen, if people are like, what can people do? I mean, I feel so passionate about this because we know these students, we see people, we see the lost opportunity, and it's so crazy. So, if people are watching, whether they're, connected to the industry or not, what can people do to try to get some more conversation going around this?
I think what we're doing today is really important, right? Op-eds like the one you wrote are really important. Having these discussions are really important because everybody that we talk to are really shocked at the statistics or the numbers, or that we don't have something, right? And I think it's important to note too, we talk about entrepreneurs, but the innovation economy is affected even by people who we can't get skilled workers. I think a lot of people out there don't realize, and I've worked in consulting companies where I can't find Americans to fill those positions. As hard as I try, I might be a year or two looking for that right person. That's crazy when I've got, 20 immigrants that, have the skills that are overqualified for the position, right? So this goes beyond that. But I think, reform is needed there. But I think these conversations are really important. I think, finding organizations in your city or state that are doing this, national organizations, for us, supporting the initiatives that we're putting forth at ISTC. Matt does a great job of pushing policy. He's got a bill in the House right now that was passed. It's going to the Senate on innovation vouchers for entrepreneurs coming out of our universities. But, I would love for people to support him in this effort, support you in this effort, support other organizations that are doing this. And Matt, if you'd like to expound on that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think it's about telling the stories that we see, right? Because I think if you don't live in this world as, we all do and kind of, see the impact of this, it can be hard to kind of tell the story, right? But I think the other thing folks can do, if they're based in the US, is talk to their, representative, talk to their senator about the need for this, because it's a small part of the wider immigration puzzle, right? So I think it's one that can kind of get overlooked. And again, that's not to say we don't need the wider immigration reform. We certainly do. But I think when, the conversation about immigration is so big, right? And it's become so politicized that it can be difficult to even have these conversations, right? And it's the reason that under the Trump administration, the IER didn't get passed. Personally, I don't think it had a whole lot to do with the policy. It was just the fact that it was a new immigration pathway, right? Yeah. And the Trump administration just didn't want to do anything that was adding immigrants, right? So I think it's an important conversation to have because, when I have this conversation with, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, I think they get it. They understand it, right? It's just a matter of navigating the unfortunately political minefield that is immigration right now. So, the more people we can have reach out to their representatives and tell this story, I think the better. And, we've even had, interactions and we've done stories with founders, who are international students who founded a company on one of our campuses that went through this and weren't able to get a visa to keep their company going. Right. And those can be really difficult conversations to have.
Yeah.
So it's difficult, but I think telling those stories to say, hey, this was somebody who had a really good idea, who had investment, whose company was growing, and they weren't able to do it. So, look at the opportunity that was lost. So I think there's a lot of different ways to tell the story, but I think it's so important to, get lawmakers involved and make sure they're aware of this.
Yeah. And I think to your point, Matt, lawmakers, this is a nonpartisan issue. Right. And everyone really understands the innovation economy of their state and how immigrant entrepreneurs support. You look at us as a country. Some of the largest companies in this country were started by immigrants. So they understand it, but it's become such a partisan issue. So I think, how do senators and representatives have those discussions with their constituents that, like you said, this isn't a zero-sum game. This is perfect for our economy. We look at it through an empathetic, human lens, but senators and representatives can talk about the money side of it, the job side of it, the taxes that they'll get. I hate to always look at that, but people understand the money.
They do, definitely. And I think, a few things that kind of came to mind there was, I think we need to recognize that some immigrants are feeling pretty traumatized over what's happened over the past few years. You might find that immigrants are actually quite reluctant to share their stories because people have been afraid. And I'm not trying to be overly dramatic here, but I have seen this because I do a lot of media work, and I'm asked a lot for clients to come forward, even on an anonymous basis, and they won't. You know, people are afraid to share anything about immigration. And I mean, so that's one thing to keep in mind. And that's so, you know, I don't always want to be the one. It's not about me or Matt or Colleen sharing other people's stories, but we need to recognize that some people don't feel comfortable sharing their own story, given kind of what's happened. And so we just need to acknowledge that and kind of recognize that. And then also applaud those who do feel comfortable in coming forward, right? And say that there is space and there is room for them to share their story if they're willing to do that, and we can support them in that effort too. I was on a panel discussion earlier on this week through AILA, our bar association, and through the American Immigration Council, and I heard the most beautiful phrase that I haven't really heard before, and it was about kind of talking about immigration to people who maybe don't always agree with you, and the phrase was deliberate dialogue, which I thought was really nice. And it was like, you know, they were saying they get deliberate dialogue training about how, you know, and also there's not necessarily one side and the other, that there's not just two sides, that there's a lot of people kind of in this gray space, and the gray space could be just not knowing, right? It could be not understanding and thinking that maybe, and kind of how do we meet people in those spaces to talk about these issues, and how do we kind of recognize where they're coming from, in a way of, are they coming from a place of fear of, you know, they're worried about their own jobs and their families, and kind of seeing that, like, we can talk about this in a way that is safe and is comfortable, and that is also like honest, and we're sharing these statistics about the opportunity that could be created for you and your family, your kids, jobs in these immigrant, you know, run companies. And I think that that's important, that we recognize that a lot of people are hurting in loads of different ways. And if we, I think, make an effort to have some of these deliberate dialogues, or come at a conversation in just like a more understanding way, then, and I think everybody has been hurt and everyone has been traumatized, especially with COVID, and just with a lot of the, you know, just so many things have happened. But that's where I am hoping that we can go as well, is kind of, you know, having these conversations, whether it's amongst ourselves, but also with people who maybe historically wouldn't have always seen eye to eye with us, and with reaching out to your members of Congress as well, because ultimately, you know, we're not the ones passing the law, right? But there's many members of Congress from Illinois that hopefully we can share these types of, you know, ideas with them to see where they can take it. Any kind of final, how do people find out about where can people contact you if people are asking, you know, want to get in touch, and what can we do from here?
Yeah, I mean, we're on LinkedIn at the moment, right? So if you want to connect and send us messages on LinkedIn, that might be the easiest. But our website is istcoalition.org. We have a lot of information about our programs and advocacy and kind of all of the things we're focused on. But one thing I did want to mention, and, you know, Karen says it in the comments too, about the importance of this as we're recovering from COVID, right? That's something we mentioned in the piece is, you know, we have entrepreneurs that are kind of standing at the ready to help us recover, right? To create new jobs. And I think this can be a really important part of that. So I guess I'll leave with that I think, you know, as we're looking to move forward and keep the momentum up, you know, the time is really right for this. It's well past due, but the time is, I think, right for this.
Yeah, definitely. Colleen?
Yeah, I'd like to add in too, like, diversity, equity, and inclusion is really important to us. And we've built out our equity framework around everything we do. And I think immigration falls into that, right? So when we think about it, diversity as a whole makes more, you know, when we talk about companies, diversity makes companies more successful, more innovative, right? And again, more money flowing into the economy. Immigration just adds to that diversity, and it's such an important piece. I mean, it's the foundation of our existence as a country. I mean, unless you are, you know, a Native American, you're either, you know, the child of an immigrant or, you know, unfortunately through slavery. But, you know, we are the product of immigration.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so Kyle has just made a comment there. He was saying he's in Wisconsin. So Kyle, the great thing about immigration is that it's federal. So meaning we have actually clients all over the place. And so we help startup clients here in New York, wherever. And I'm sure there's probably local, I don't know if there's like a Wisconsin version of the Illinois Science and Tech. Is there kind of different coalitions similar to the one in Illinois?
I think there is, yeah. I'm not sure of their name off the top of my head, but I think there is.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I just think as well with like, there's so many like great innovation centers, like 1871. I know that they were in the news a few times this week for different acquisitions. And so there's such a strong supportive network for these, for all entrepreneurs as well, not just immigrant entrepreneurs, and through the universities as well. One thing I will plug is that we have a podcast called Immigration Revelation, where we try to feature, and this is where I love it because it's not just me talking. It's people who want to come forward and share their story. But Mert from Swipe Sense is on there. Lots of other immigrant entrepreneurs. And I think if anybody knows anybody who would like to be interviewed on that podcast, please feel free to get in touch with me. And if you guys want to listen to it, that would be great. It's on all different platforms. And then I would say what I would be hoping for is just to keep this dialogue going. I mean, the op-ed was a piece that we wanted to have a springboard into other conversations. If anybody knows an immigrant entrepreneur, would-be entrepreneur, someone who would feel comfortable, coming on one of these live broadcasts, we would love to talk to them as well. We're doing a big lobby day. It's an annual lobby day that we do normally in DC. Obviously this year it's virtual due to COVID, but it's the AILA, it's our National Day of Action, and AILA is our bar association, the American Immigration Lawyers Association. So we're lobbying on Congress on April 22nd, which I think also happens to be Earth Day. And we're going to be chatting to them about these types of things. And so, there's always opportunities, I think, to be active in whatever way, people's activisms can take many different forms, and you kind of try things out and see what you feel comfortable, even just like tweeting things, or, there's lots of different ways to use your voice in this space. And I think supporting other immigrant entrepreneurs is also a great way to do it. I want to thank everybody for joining us today. I'm just so proud of myself. Sorry for organizing this streaming, because I was so afraid of having some type of tech disaster. I was telling everybody before I was doing a webinar, and I think my daughter signed on to a homeschooling Zoom. And so I got kicked off my own webinar. And then when I joined back on, I had a space background, and it was all cat lawyer thing, and I was panicking. So I was so worried that I was going to have some type of tech disaster with the Illinois Science and Technology Coalition. That would have been terrible.
Please, I have difficulties all the time.
Well, we didn't have any, and so we are so close to wrapping up now, and I'm hoping that we can, I'm going to try and figure out, hopefully we can save the broadcast. Hopefully it allows us to do that, because I think it's been an amazing conversation. Thanks to everybody for joining us from afar: San Francisco, Galway, Chicago, Philadelphia, New Jersey, all over the place, Wisconsin, Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Thank you, everybody. Wishing you all a great weekend. Colleen and Matt, thanks for your support and for working together to get out the piece and to, just continue to have these conversations. I'm really excited to be doing this work with you.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks for all your support, Fiona. It's been great working with you on this, and I know we'll be doing it. Hopefully not for too much longer, because we'll figure it out. But
yeah, exactly. There'll be a startup visa, and then we'll be talking about that. So hopefully.
Yeah,
totally agreed. I'm just so honored to be here with you today, Fiona, and we look forward to working with you on this.
Great. Thanks, everybody. Have a fab weekend. Take care.
Everyone.
Bye. Thank you all.